Of the original three starters, Venusaur was in an interesting situation. It didn't have that full offensive 100 damage attack like Charizard did, or that full support Rain Dance like Blastoise did. Instead, its Pokemon power was called Energy Trance. Interestingly, I remember it called Energy Transfer, but it states, as often as you like during your turn before you attack, you may take one Grass Energy card attached to one of your Pokemon and attach it to a different one. This gave it an interesting support role where it was kinda like Blastoise where you can move energy cards around, but it wasn't something insane going past the 1 energy per turn rule. This means to get the full benefit of that ability, you have to be attaching energy cards every turn, and when you get Venusaur out, then you can start manipulating them and moving around to wherever you want. If you wanted to run a Venusaur deck, it would have to be more of a supportive role, not a direct offensive role with Venusaur, so you would typically have possibly up to 4 Venusaurs into the deck. If you ran the 4 Venusaurs, you might consider getting 4 Ivysaurs or 4 Bulbasaurs, which really isn't the best recommendation of setup. You don't want to overstack your deck with a bunch of evolutions or basic Pokemon. In that case, you're going to once again be using something like Pokemon Breeder, which allows you to evolve a Pokemon to its final form. So you probably have 4 of these in a deck, as well as up to 4 Pokemon Traders, so if you have one or the other, you can trade around and get what you need. And of course, computer search, very important, because if you have Venusaur and don't have Pokemon Breeder, you can computer search for it, or vice versa. If you have Pokemon Breeder and no Venusaur, then you can Pokemon search for it. So this means you would do things such as drop a few Ivysaurs, maybe 1 or 2, because Pokemon Breeder could essentially replace an Ivysaur if you want to look at it that way. With that power transfer ability, you could definitely have the 4 Venusaurs supporting each other, or you can have it support another Pokemon, a grass Pokemon specifically. Base Set 1 didn't have a ton of grass options available. The top 2 that were worth looking into was Beedrill and Nidoking. Beedrill's 2 attacks, Twin Needle, flip 2 coins, does 30 damage per head, and Poison Sting, flip a coin if any Pokemon is now poisoned. Those are pretty good attacks. Poison is very underrated because of how it does damage at the end of your turn and at the end of your opponent's turn. So you can hit them with that 40 damage, and then your turn's over, they take additional 10 damage. Nidoking on the other hand, 10 more HP, same amount of energy card requirements. Thrash, flip a coin, if heads, its attack does 30 damage plus 10 more. If you get a Tails though, this attack does 30 damage and Nidoking does 10 damage to itself, that's not really great. But interestingly, Toxic, that's a pretty interesting version of Poison, because rather than doing 10 damage per turn, it states it does 20 damage per turn. So if any Pokemon is now poisoned, it now takes 20 damage instead of 10 damage each player's turn. So that's pretty big. It is 20 damage, but again, 20 damage per turn. Your opponent has to switch that Pokemon out or use a full heal or evolve to get rid of that poison. The only problem with those 2 Pokemon is that they're both stage 2 evolutions. That means you're going to be even more dependent on the trainer cards such as Computer Search, Pokemon Trader, and Pokemon Breeder. If you went down the Beedrill road, you'd be using probably 2 Kakunas. You could always use 4, but 2 would probably be the better option, just because of how Pokemon Breeder works, where you can use Pokemon Breeder as if it was just like another Kakuna, so to speak. If you went down the Nidoking road, you'd be doing the same exact thing, except obviously you'd be using Nidorino and Nidoran. This is when you see why Pokemon Trader and Pokemon Breeder come really useful, especially Trader, because if you get Nidorino and you need an Ivysaur, you can Pokemon Trader for the other. If you had a Nidoran instead of a Bulbasaur or a Venusaur instead of Nidoking, you can Pokemon Trader for the other. There's another trainer card you're going to make a really big use out of, and that was called Item Finder. Item Finder had the ability that you discard 2 of other cards from your hand in order to put a trainer card from a discard pile into your hand. That was your best way to recover a Pokemon Breeder or Pokemon Trader, which in a deck that has 2 stage 2 evolutions, you're going to be using those 2 a lot. This is basically what a Venusaur deck would look like, a Venusaur support deck of course, with Nidoking or Beedrill. And of course, to round it out, you could use Chanseys, which is always such a great staple to have. And to support Chansey, as well as Beedrill and Nidoking, you could use the Double Colors Energy card, which actually works really well because Beedrill, Nidoking, Kakuna, and Nidorino all actually use colorless energies in their attacks, so you can definitely power them up a little faster that way. And of course, the other options I'm not really going to talk about too much. Super Energy Removal, Bill, Professor Oak. These are definitely mandatory staples you want to include in your deck. A big thing that I didn't mention in my other videos was Last. Last was one trainer card that was extremely overpowered for its time. You and your opponent show each other's hands, then shuffle all trainer cards from your hands into your deck. This is a finisher. So you would do every possible thing to get Venusaur, Beedrill, Nidoking, or just get your Pokemon as powered up as possible. Then at the end of your turn, before you attack if you could, use Last, and that would force your opponent to have no trainer cards in their hand. So they would have to draw a Professor Oak or a Bill, or just, I don't know what else they could do, and hope that they can reset their hand and do something on their turn, because your following turn, you would just steamroll your powered up Pokemon. If for some reason you didn't want to go Chansey, there were a few other options you could go with that were grass only if you wanted to go grass only, not that I would recommend it. In base set, there wasn't much more options. There was Tangela, which wasn't really very good. Simply because for 50 HP, a max 3 energy cards, 20 damage, it does cause poison, it does have paralyze, so that is kind of a stall. Paralyze is a stall, and the poison, again, poison is really good damage over time, so to speak. But for 50 HP, 3 energy cards, it really wasn't worth the investment. The other option was Coughing, which in base it did not have its evolution form, so it cost 2 energy cards for the Pokemon to be either confused with tails or poisoned with heads. So it had 2 status effects it can do. At a flip of a coin, that was alright. It was a stall card, but again 50 HP, so it was a stall card. The last option was a Caterpie with evolution Metapod but no Butterfree. If you did go down that road, you'd be putting yourself in a bad situation, because that's another evolution card you possibly would have to have in the deck unless you just use Caterpie alone. Caterpie's just 1 energy card. Flip a coin if it has the petty Pokemon is now paralyzed, so it's a stall card. It just paralyzes your opponent's Pokemon, 40 HP. That is pretty feasible if you wanted to just have something quick to stall out. If you did evolve to Metapod, it does gain the ability to paralyze them, which again is just a stall for 20 damage. Of course, when Jungle came out, that's when things really exploded for grass Pokemon, which I guess would make sense because it's jungle, grass, duh. Aside from Chansey getting replaced with Kangaskhan, which gave you Fetch, a draw power card, so you can draw cards just by having 1 grass energy attached to it. And for grass, you now have the option of Venomoth, Pinsir, Scyther, Nidoqueen, which, by the way, thank you Kevin for sending me a Nidoqueen. My Nidoqueen was actually in Spanish, I never noticed that. Vileplume, Victory Bell, Parasect, Executor, and finally, Butterfree. This does mean that you could be even more heavily reliant on Pokemon Breeder, Item Finder, Computer Search, and Pokemon Trader than you were before, depending on what kind of grass deck you want to make now with the expansion from Jungle, increasing how many grass Pokemon there are to use. If you went down a simple Haymaker style deck, which I'm going to talk about next, you'd have Cypher and Pinsir. You would go down the road of having more energy removal cards such as Super Energy Removal, definitely using Kangaskhan more, and definitely going to use Double Energy Colors cards more because of how useful they are on those two. You could do something silly and thematic like a Viridian Forest deck. So Venusaur support, you'd have Butterfree finally in, so you have Butterfree, Metapod, Caterpie, as well as Beedrill, Kakuna, and Weedle. So you can live those dreams of being a Viridian Forest all over again if you really want to. I don't know why you would. Or you could just make a complete bug deck, have Venomoth and Velnat in there, as well as Cypher and Pinsir if you really want to. Something to note though, if you do go down this road of having something like a Butterfree and Beedrill with Venusaur, you have the problem with the Stage 2 Pokemon, because these are Stage 2, Stage 1, you're going to need Pokemon Breeder even more, so you're much more reliant and dependent on Pokemon Breeder, which means you're much more reliant and dependent on Item Finder to be able to grab Pokemon Breeder to reuse it if you already used it once and need it again. Another big thing you got was how Nidoqueen's first ability worked, Boyfriends. Does 20 damage plus 20 more damage for each Nidoking you have in play. So that gave Nidoking from the base set 1 even more value when Jungle came rolling in, because they had a card that was literally a support card for Nidoking, or I should say a card that was supported by Nidoking. I remember running that deck back then, and people had interesting names for deck. I think it was the Royal Grass deck. I don't remember if that's what it was called. It was either Royal deck, Grass Royal deck, or Royal Grass deck, or just the Queen and King deck. But I remember specifically running that deck back then. But again, you're gonna have a problem because Stage 2, Stage 1, Pokemon Breeder, you're gonna need those, rely on them very heavily, because the more Stage 2 Pokemon you have in your deck, the more dependent you are on Pokemon Breeder. You could just put more Stage 1 Pokemon, but then you don't want to have a situation where you have too many Stage 1 Pokemon and not enough basic Pokemon to support them. Finally, the last big thing you could do was a Victory Bell and Vileplume deck. I remember running this deck too, back then. I don't remember if there was any nickname for it, I think it was just a grass deck. Interestingly, it's not like these two comboed in any kind of way, they were just associated with each other because of how close they were in the Pokédex. The nice thing about Vileplume is its Pokemon ability Heal. Once during your turn before you attack, you may flip a coin. If heads, remove 1 damage counter from one of your Pokemon. So if you had 4 of these on your bench, or any number of them on your bench, you could effectively use them as healing potions. Of course, a flip a coin doesn't always make it reliable, but it is something to consider. And then lastly, you had Executor and Parasect, which no one really talked about them. They were the Pokemon that were very disregarded because of their high energy cost. Well, on Parasect, the high energy cost for 30 damage. And the one thing with Executor with its ability, Big Explosion, as a mock-up explosion, which is you flip a coin for each energy card attached to this Pokemon, does 20 damage times the number of heads. Jungle was the biggest support for grass. After that came Fossil, and Fossil didn't have anything really great for grass. It did have one great grass Pokemon, Muck, but you would never run Muck with Venusaur, never. Because of its Pokemon power, Toxic Gas. Ignore all Pokemon powers other than Toxic Gas. So that literally makes Venusaur mostly useless. Well, not completely useless, but since its big strength comes from its Pokemon power, that makes it really useless. So you would never run Grimer and Muck together in a deck with Venusaur unless you were a masochist of some sort. Fossil did introduce Golbat and Zubat, the evolution Wheezing finally for coughing, and Arbok and Ekans. So you could actually make a Team Rocket Grunt deck. I actually made a Team Rocket deck from this, minus the Venusaur. I just used Wheezing, Arbok, and a Meowth. It wasn't like the dark version like in Team Rocket set, but it was the Pokemon Jesse and James used, and Meowth there, of course, from the show. That's pretty much all the grass Pokemon that you would use to support a Venusaur deck. Venusaur is a real strong Pokemon with 60 attack, 100 HP for base hit times, but his real strength was the energy transfer and being able to move energy cards around. Because of how limited you are to just one energy card per turn, at least this way, you can move them around, so you're always attaching energy per turn and it's never a waste, you can always move it to another Pokemon later. Last thing worth mentioning, which is actually a very interesting trivial thing, was that in a Venusaur deck, a deck based on grass Pokemon and colorless Pokemon, you actually could include electric Pokemon. Now, I've never seen anyone actually run a deck like that, and I never did, because, well, I didn't know that as a little kid, but there's something interesting about Electro that really works with Venusaur, and that's its Pokemon ability, Bazap. Bazap breathes. At any time during your turn before you attack, you may knock out Electro and attach it to one of your other Pokemon. If you do, choose a type of energy. Electro is now that energy card instead of a Pokemon that provides 2 energy of that type. So one thing to get out of the way, it's a knockout thing. I don't agree with it, but that's just how the rules are. If you optionally choose to knock out your own Pokemon, like Electro with that ability, your opponent draws a prize card. I don't like that, I don't think that's how it should be, but that is how the game is run. So your opponent does get a prize card if you knock this out, so you have to use this very carefully. But when you do that, it becomes, you would choose a grass energy because you're running Venusaur, grass deck, duh. So it becomes a grass energy, so you can knock it out and attach it to Venusaur or any other grass Pokemon. And it counts as 2 grass energies, kind of like the double colorless energy card counts as 2 colorless energy cards. So it's 2 grass energies, and with energy transfer, you can actually transfer Electro, which is now 2 grass energy cards, to another grass Pokemon. Meaning that it is effectively a double grass energy card, like a double colors energy card, providing 2 grass instead of 2 colors energies. Now, as a kid, I did not know that, and nor did I notice it, and I don't recall seeing anyone ever run a deck like that, or anyone ever use Electrobe like that. Mostly because the fact that when you knock it out, your opponent gets a prize, that was a big discouragement. Not a lot of people ran Electrode because of that. And actually, like I said a second ago, I don't recall anyone ever running Electrode, at least base set Electrode, because of that. And to make matters interesting, in order to have Electrode, you have to have Voltorb, and Voltorb's attack tackle is a colorless energy card. So you could actually put Voltorb in a grass energy and not support it with any electric energy cards, just to evolve it into Electrode, just to knock it out and turn it into a grass energy card. But that pretty much sums up Venusaur's role as a support and slightly or a complete offense Pokemon. Depends how you're looking at it. It is more of a support than offensive. Venusaur was in that interesting spot where it wasn't fully offensive like a Charizard, and it wasn't fully supportive and offensive like a Blastoise. It did have a support role, and it did have an advantage of an attack role with that energy transfer ability.